Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this week's episode, Masoud Golsorkhi talks to broadcaster Gary Younge. They discuss his essay collection Dispatches from the Diaspora and the utility of identity politics in an increasingly polarized society.
I'm going to ask you the most tedious question. So, why did you select this selection of out of the many hundreds of articles?
It's a good question, actually. I mean, I've done one collection before, which was from America, and that came out, I think, in 2005 or 2006. Originally, what I had thought I was going to do was a collection of interviews, which I was going to call Conversations in Black, because I'd met significant numbers of kind of quite prominent black people: Marianne Jean-Baptiste, Angela Levy, Louis Farrakhan, Jesse Jackson, Maya Angelou, Spike Lee, and I thought, well, I'll put them all together. But the fact is, while I had lots of those interviews, that not all of them were that good. Some of them may not have been good because, you know, of my writing or whatever, but some of them, you know, I interviewed Tracy Chapman, and she was chronically shy. She didn't really want to speak. Or Spike Lee was just difficult, you know, and
he was pugnacious.
And so when I looked at it, I thought to actually make that work, you'd have to kind of pad it out a bit, and I don't really. Why would you do that? Yeah. But then I thought, but there's a different way of assembling my work, which would be around the diaspora, around the black diaspora, and it felt like a good time. I finished at The Guardian in January 2020, started as an academic in April 2020. End of May comes the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And, you know, I thought, there's something, this seems like it would make sense to do this now. And then beyond that, and this isn't why I did it, but it's why I'm glad I did it. When I started having conversations with younger people who were 25, 26, and realized, oh, you know, you were born the year that Mandela stepped down. Like, you know, you were barely conscious for Hurricane Katrina. Barack Obama is in the kind of right at the beginning of your kind of any kind of awareness of you know, the political world. Stephen Lawrence was always dead for you, and actually the McPherson report happened before you were politically conscious, and so there was some value, political value really, in establishing some kind of lineage between
these events,
and that there was a genuine bookending, which is my career started with the election of Mandela. That piece, that's the first piece in the book, is the piece that gets me my job. And I finish just before Black Lives Matter. But in the book, there are a couple of pieces around Black Lives Matter written for other publications. And so it made sense. But the selection, as all selections should be, was tough.
No, because by nature, they're always written for the audience at the time. And they're really on the edge of your seat, kind of, you know, they're not that reflective. They were like, this is happening now. This is what I think of it now.
Yeah.
Do you have at any moment kind of feel like re-editing them and saying, oh, no, with the benefit of hindsight? Were you tempted at least?
I was definitely tempted to re-edit them for style, like, oh man, why did I use that word? That's a terrible word. And some of them, you know, the night Obama wins the election, that's written with about 3 hours sleep. To be
honest, most of us were quite drunk.
Yeah,
by the time it happened.
I know, but we sobered up now, or at least some of us have. Or the piece, the night that George Zimmerman was acquitted, which was written in an angry hour and a half that I really wanted to get done so I could send it to The Guardian in Australia, who were the only people who could put it up. I was really anxious that it went up soon. So they're not all the best pieces necessarily, but they are the pieces that are often written either in the moment or for a moment. And then there are some that I would say, the piece about Uncle Tom, the piece about what Europe thinks of Black America, my farewell to America. There are some that are more reflective and that take the time. Yeah,
no, absolutely. No, I think that's what makes them really such a refreshing read, really, for a book of essays. Because essays have this propensity to be kind of wise and kind of like, well, I always knew this.
Yeah.
You know? As this kind of reminded me more like kind of Baldwin's kind of like, just,
notes.
you know what I mean? That's what I'm thinking now. And, and it kind of takes a bit of guts to put that out sometimes as a writer, because, you know, the book is going to be there for, you know, long after we're dead.
Yeah, well, and, you know, there's the internet, so a lot of these pieces will be there for a long time. But I also think that, like, the primary job of a journalist is to be descriptive rather than predictive. So I don't think there's anything there that I got horribly wrong. But our job isn't to kind of see the future.
Yeah.
It's to try and understand what we see in the hope that it will give some clues to the future. So in that sense, you only get things wrong if you think you have the capacity to get them right. You know,
or if there's a right version ever anyway available at any time. I was intrigued by at your interview for the Guardian bursary. You said that you want to be a columnist, not a reporter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, I was very precocious. Right? I joined the Trotskyist movement when I was 15. I left when I was 16, but still. I set up an anti-apartheid organisation at my college. I was a student union sabbatical for a year. I studied in the Soviet
So your mom
Union.
had done a good job.
She had done a good job, yeah. And so, and the university I went to didn't really have much of a newspaper, so I didn't. What I knew about what I liked about journalism was that you got to say your opinions, and it was only in the process of becoming a journalist that I realised, to be honest, anyone can have opinions. Everyone has opinions, arguably, but your capacity to go out and talk to people and draw out their stories, that is the red meat of journalism. That is the thing that makes this what it is. Was something that my cart came before the horse in that sense. So then, of all the things that I had seen of journalism, the thing that I wanted to do was tell everybody what I thought. And it didn't take long to realise that actually what I thought wasn't that interesting unless and until I could buttress it
validate it with experience.
with experience and going to speak to people and trying things out and so on. So that's really about the kind of precocity and to some extent arrogance of a young man, which I'm really kind of fine with, actually. You know what I mean?
But in this time, how, from outside and then from very deep inside, how do you view journalism?
From the outside, I understood it as being like most of the things of that level. It was done by elite people for elite people. That it was, what do they used to call it, the internal memos of the middle
Ruling
class.
classes.
Yeah. So that's how I viewed it at the time.
Once you were in the mothership.
Yeah, then it was really clear that that's actually what it was. Actually. That's not what it had to be.
Yeah.
So I did start to see not just beautiful writing, but penetrative reporting, engaged commentary, that there was a way of doing it that didn't have to be that, but that it would always be fighting against this oligarchic tendency, which really has become increasingly evident over the last decade, I would say. And there are three examples for me where that became clear. One was Brexit, one was Trump, and the other was Corbyn. And in all three examples, there was this sense that these people or subjects had violated the sacred space between the media class and the political class. And the media class and the political class were more or less the same people.
Yeah.
You know, there was a report in 2019 about social mobility, which showed that newspaper columnists were more likely to be drawn from private school in Oxbridge than high court judges, senior high court judges, or lords in the House of Lords. So you're talking about this group of people, so that when something like Trump happens, there was this chronic lack of curiosity. You don't have to like Trump, that's obviously, or indulge his supporters, but if you're going to call them racists or bigots or xenophobic or xenophobes and say that's what's driving them, at least have had the decency to have spoken to them and to have found out where this is coming from. And in my experience, when I spoke to them, it's not that those things were absent, but that it was more complicated. And even politically, I think, if you want to defeat these things, then you'd better understand them. I felt the same way about Brexit. I voted Remain. I thought we should remain. But the blanket dismissal and lampooning, as though there was no possible argument, as though everyone had gone mad, as though only stupid people will do this. Well, then...
pathology of the other,
And similarly with Corbyn. And it goes back to that predictive thing, actually, that they think, well, we know this. We know what's going to happen. We know who these people are. Which does a real disservice to both the profession and those who consume what they do.
Talking about a more kind of positive aspect, now that you're at the other side of the sausage factory, looking back at the media perspective, what gives you hope and inspiration in the non-traditional media landscape?
First of all, we don't have the gatekeepers that we did because of new technology, which means that we can have different voices come through. The barriers to publishing and amplification have been reduced to almost zero. If you have a cell phone, you can do it. If we think of something like George Floyd and how we came to know about that was citizen journalism, right? That was people taking pictures and video and amplifying it and things getting known. And that while this oligarchic tendency still exists, it's not necessarily always dominant. When, newspapers in particular, or what were just newspapers, kind of lament the fall in sales and readership, you think, well, why are you surprised? And I think it's interesting what's going on with Fox at the moment, where in order to chase their viewership,
the demographics,
they have to do things that are completely untrue, that they know to be untrue. And what they show is a complete disdain for their viewership, but that having started this ball rolling, it's gone out of their control. I'm heartened by when I see the voices, particularly, I would say, of younger women of colour that are coming through, some in the mainstream, some outside. That gives me heart.
Interests me at the time when when Alan Rusbridger left The Guardian, I naturally assumed you were at least the top 3 candidate, if not a shoo-in, and you never pitched for that.
No.
Well, they told me why.
Well, a few reasons, I guess. It didn't even occur to me at the time, but there were a few reasons. First of all, I'd just come back to England with an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old. You do a job like that, you don't see your kids. Right. I think. I mean, maybe Alan saw his kids. I'm not saying that about other people. I'm saying that about myself. That it wasn't gonna work with my private life.
Right.
So that was one thing. Secondly, I've never run anything.
Right.
I've never had a budget. I've never had staff. And there's an element of that job which is about budget and staff. That's about kind of spreadsheets and people, and that matters. To be fair,
it disappoints me. The other day, a friend of mine had come out from abroad, had gone for a visit at the BBC, and her feedback to me was that there are way more colourful faces in front of the camera than behind.
Oh yeah, that's always true.
So it's kind of, I feel like that's one of the major areas that needs, addressing is the kind of people to be in the meetings.
Yeah, well, so I was in some of the meetings until it felt to me like my presence might be decorative, and that was the beginning of me thinking, actually, kind of maybe I should move on. But to be the editor of The Guardian is a somewhat managerial position, and it wasn't for me. I also kind of looking at what happened to Corbyn, say, and others, that given my history, legacy, the kind of the things I'd supported, the things that I'd said, I don't know that, and this wouldn't have stopped me if I'd wanted to do it. I don't know that wouldn't have set off some kind of crazy panic. That could have been.
I particularly because of the Corbyn thing, I kind of felt like of all the people who ever stood up for Corbyn, the Blob finds it very difficult to challenge black people of glamorous positions of prominence. Stormzy, for example.
Yeah.
He doesn't get half as much. And I think he's an incredibly noble, brilliant man who has, shown incredible moral courage. But he does... People are just scared of challenging him because they know they can be picked up on something, And I feel like the same for the Blob in The Guardian. They would have found it much harder to challenge you than other people.
First of all, they'd have found a way. And secondly, and I'm not, they always find a way, whoever they are. But secondly, if we look at what's happening to Diane Abbott at the moment, then you cannot make a mistake.
Yeah.
And that kind of, for all of the ways in which Stormzy is brilliant, there's an interview with him in the book, and I was kind of, I
love the fact that you covered the infamous festival.
Yeah.
Which was just really adorable. I hadn't read it at the time, but I think it's an amazing read.
But for a grime artist, for a rapper, for a black man, it's amazing how little tabloid presence he has. That he hasn't court cases, he isn't in and out of cars with strange women. He hasn't. Like, one of the reasons is because he hasn't made many mistakes, but the moment he makes a mistake, they will be on him like white on rice.
Yeah.
And actually, they made up a mistake, didn't they? There was a moment at which he was asked by an Italian paper, "Do you think Britain is racist?" And he said, "Yeah, 100%." And that became, Stormzy thinks Britain is 100% racist. Sajid Javid got involved, other people got involved, it became a kind of whole thing, and then they had to, so you don't even have to make a mistake.
The situation with Diane Abbott is particularly tragic. Because actually she was my MP when she was first elected.
She's my MP now.
Yeah, exactly, as we know. Of all the various people in the Labour Party who've come through, she's done about 90% of suffering, I think. And even during Corbyn, she got way more hate than Corbyn at the height of it. And it is, you're right. I mean, they're kind of laying siege all the time, and they're what are they called? Bear traps.
Yeah.
All around us, everywhere.
Well, I mean, her experience, she made a mistake. There's no doubt about that. But she owned it, and she apologized about it in minutes. But first of all. And this speaks to one piece that's in the book about if Boris Johnson were a black woman, she cannot make a mistake. Yeah. Boris Johnson can talk about pickaninnies and watermelon smiles, and he can write a book in which there's anti-Semitic caricatures, and he can just get away with it. He can bluff it out.
Be racist to the Burmese in Burma.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, silly me. She cannot. She cannot make a mistake. She's not allowed as a black woman. She cannot make a mistake. And that the space, I did a piece after a series of Tory gaffes around race, and I said, look, racism is not about gaffes. It's a system of oppression, and if you're a black person and the worst thing that happens to you is that someone calls you coloured, you are blessed. I've been chased down the road by men with baseball bats. I've been beaten up by cops. I've had shit put on my door. Someone saying coloured or funny tinge or whatever. And I say in this piece, which is about Tory white racism, I say, you make a gaffe, you apologise for it, you pay whatever proportionate price there is, and then we all move on. I'm not interested in people misspeaking. And I'm not going to hold that for white Tory people and not have it for Diane Abbott.
What was so shocking, that time she made the mistake with the maths in that interview, is that she got, this proportionate amount of hate and accusations of incompetence, where on the other side, Tory ministers actually embezzled the public. Actually, vast amounts of money disappeared during COVID. And have they got 10% of the, finger pointing or kind of accusation? I feel like what's so depressing is that the Diane Abbott thing, what just really completely destroyed my optimism was the way that the comedians and the entertaining class fell in to give her a good kicking.
Oh yeah.
And I just thought that was just devastating. Yeah. All these people, you kind of assumed you were kind of on your side, but they were using this opportunity to kick this.
And I remember when Ron Atkinson used the N-word and there was a kind of pile-on. And I said at the time, there's more to racism than the N-word. And I'm not going to judge a whole life by one moment. So let's look at their record. And then if they are the kind of person who treats black people like that, well, then fine. But I grew up in Stevenage among white people who would say all kinds of things and then be the first people to your door when you when you needed them. There has to be a more complicated understanding, but it's the politics of it. And when they come for you, they come for you. And the truth is, through a lot of these articles that I wrote, and particularly I'm thinking of, say, riots are a class act, where I speak in defence of rioting. There's a real knot in my stomach when that goes live. I don't know where the brickbats are going to come from. And that kind of people are lying in, then, this may sound both self-obsessive and self-aggrandizing, but people are lying. There are people who are waiting for you to make a mistake. They don't like it that you, not just as a black person, but a black person with a certain kind of politics, occupies a certain kind of space. And the moment you get the adjective wrong, they're on you.
You quoted Andrew Davis as the differences that bring no difference, changes that bring no change. How do you view the kind of the progress of identity politics and representation overall in 25 years?
So, identity politics is one of those things, I think now, a bit like woke or political correctness, where it can mean whatever you want it to mean, so long as usually you don't like it, And I think that there is my third book, Who Are We? And how identity politics took over the world, was about saying, look, there is identity in politics. There's no avoiding it. People come from a place. And actually, the only difference between me and a kind of posh white male columnist is that I'm aware of my identity. And they think basically everybody's white and posh unless you're not. So nobody, and the more powerful your identity is, the less likely you are to be aware of it. So nobody's ever asked me, when did you realise you were straight? Or how did you manage to balance being a foreign correspondent and being a father? Because that's not the questions that straight people or men get asked. So that said, and this was the theme of the book, I say identity is like fire. It can warm your hands or it can burn you badly. And that I think identity is a great place, an inevitable place to start in politics, but a terrible place to finish. Because if you finish with identity, then you finish in a form of fundamentalism, and that can be a fundamentalism of nation, of race, of gender, of sex, of whatever. And so I think, it's one of those things we have to handle with caution. And one of the ways in which I think we were insufficiently cautious is around the politics of representation. So if we take Obama's victory, which was a wonderful thing, but throughout his candidacy, I would talk about distinguishing between symbols and substance. This is a symbolically important moment, but let's not confuse it for substance. That kind of, his agenda is not much more left-wing than Hillary's agenda. He is a product of a party that is awash with money, that is tied to a whole kind of system which is corrupt. There is a limit to what he's going to do. And symbolically, it's very important that less than, at the time, or less than 50 years after black people have secured the right to vote, we have a black president. That matters. And I got a lot of pushback from that. And this is, oh, don't be such an Eeyore, this is such a wonderful thing. You know, some people used to say, Obama declared on the same weekend as my son was born. And people would say, this is going to be a wonderful thing for your son. And I would say, why? What do you mean, why? It's going to be a black president. I would say, well, is he going to limit the chance of him going to jail? Is he going to expand the chance of him going to university? Is he going to limit the chance of him getting shot? Because those are the things that I really care about for my son. I can see what this is going to do for Obama. What's it going to do for my son? And they didn't want to hear that. But if you don't have those arguments then when Rishi Sunak shows up and Kwasi Kwarteng show up, then, you know, you're left with your pants down and saying, well, this is a wonderful thing. It was wonderful for Obama. Why isn't it wonderful for these people? And the quote that you cite from Angela Davis when I interviewed her, she says, there is a model of diversity as a difference that brings no difference and a change that means no change, where things look different, but they act the same, where you get photo opportunities instead of equal opportunities. So I don't think that there's anyone sitting on a plane destined for Rwanda thinking, well, at least it was Priti Patel and Suella Braverman who made this happen, you know, that's progress. Yeah. So we have to look at racism as a system, and we have to look at how the system operates. But you can change the colour of the people operating the system, so long as the system is working, then it really doesn't matter. And actually, arguably, sometimes the system operates easier when it's multicolored, and you can say, see? So I think that the argument for rigor in our thinking about these things, there can be a lot of sloppy thinking. We suddenly find ourselves challenged by, well, why isn't it good that Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister? And to which I say, symbolically, it has relevance. Substantially, let's just look at what he does, and let's judge him on what he does.
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.